In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at how the lab is actually built from the ground up. So I've got a couple of slides that I'm going to show you just to help you visualize this better. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking a single ESXi host, a single ESXi server, and what I've done is I've taken it and I currently have two 8-core CPUs, totaling 16 CPUs, and these are E5 2660s at 2.2 gigahertz, and I have about 128 gigs of RAM installed. So basically, I have every DIMM slot populated with, I believe it is 8 gig DIMMs, so or RAM chips, and that's how that is getting populated. What I did then is I took and connected the lab or my server to my home iSCSI environment. So I have a QNAP storage appliance that is providing iSCSI communications. And then I went ahead and I started deploying VMs. So one of the things that I did, let's go back over here real quick. One of the first things that I had to do from a networking perspective is let me go ahead and refresh this because for some reason things aren't showing up. Give that a couple seconds to do its thing. So one of the things that I did is, first and foremost, I created a couple of new vSwitches. The first vSwitch that I have is vSwitch 0. It has one uplink and it's how I'm actually managing the ESXi host. Then I have the SAN switch, which has got one port group in it called SAN, and it's got one uplink. This connects me to my storage appliance so that I can bring iSCSI communication into the host. Then I have this third vSwitch called Vmware Lab. Now we go over here to port groups. You can see that for management network I have one active port, so it's one VM kernel adapter with the IP address of 10.255.1.101. And then I have SAN with an IP address of 10.1.2.101 so that I can communicate with my iSCSI target. And then lastly, I have VMware Lab Trunk. And as you can see, VMware Lab Trunk is actually configured as a trunk. So it's got all 4094 VLANs allowed. 4095 in VMware speak means trunk or tag all VLANs. And then I've got 22 active ports in it. And what that basically does is and if you look back over here on this switch, we look at VMware Lab, and I click inside of here, you can see there's only one port group. So here's the actual switch itself, and you can see there's only one port group in it, and that port group is VMware Lab Trunk. That port group is what you actually name and then associate your VM NICs to. So as you can see, I got a whole bunch of stuff in here working. Now I gave this a VLAN ID of 4095, and that's what allows me to do trunking. So I can tag different VLAN or different. I can go and create different port groups inside of ESXi, inside of my home, my lab, and all that good stuff. Now I also set the MTU to be 9000, so I'll be able to do pretty much anything VXLAN related, or because we're focusing on NSX for vSphere right now, I'm doing a very similar thing, identical to this deployment on another host for NSX-T, but I'm still going through the motions of learning NSX-T in more detail. Now what I did was, on the virtual machine side of the house, is I created ESXi 1, 2, and 3, and then I added ESXi 4. I'm actually going to go ahead and take the SAN, power it off. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete it because it is, I decided to go a different route with the SAN storage. Go ahead and just get rid of that real quick. So I have my 4 ESXi hosts, and if I was to click on ESXi host 1, you can see that it's got 4 CPUs, and one of the things I had to do on the CPUs, it's not going to show me here, but what I had to do was I gave it 4 CPUs, which is what is necessary to run a virtual environment. I gave it 10 gigs of RAM, and I gave it 3 hard disks. I gave it one 100 gig hard drive, which is going to basically directly attach storage, and then I gave it a 128 gig drive and a 256 gig drive. This drive here has been identified as flash inside of vCenter, and this one has been identified as just a regular hard drive. These two coupled together, plus host 1, 2, and 3 over here on the left, are what allow me to run vSAN in my environment. So it's a hybrid of both flash and hard drives. So I'm running a vSAN cluster inside of my vCenter deployment, and you can see all the IP addresses that I have deployed for the VM kernel adapters that are rolling on that environment. So with that in play, that gives me the ability, with all the network adapters being associated, I can connect them all together to the same connections, so the same switch, the same layer 2 network, if you will. And I did that with all 3 of the hosts, right? They're all identically deployed so that they're squared away that way. Now, one thing that I will point out, if I go in here and I go to Edit, underneath CPU, if you expand CPU, you need to make sure that you at least minimally expose hardware-assisted virtualization to the guest OS. If you don't do that, you won't be able to do nested virtualization. This says enables full CPU virtualization by exposing hardware-assisted virtualization features of the underlying processor to the guest operating system. That allows a guest operating system to be installed inside of the virtual ESXi host, so in the nested environment, and then I'm able to deploy VMs inside of the ESXi host that you're looking at right here. This is me deploying ESXi inside of ESXi. So VMware instead of VMware. And it's actually pretty cool how it works out. And then I went ahead and I exposed everything CPU wise to it, and then I enabled CPU hot add. So if I need to add CPUs for whatever reason, guess what? I can add CPUs on the fly and all that good stuff. Now, if you're having a hard time visualizing what I'm talking about, this is basically what I did. Was this big red rectangular thing looking right here, this is the ESXi host I was just showing you. And what I did was I deployed 4 ESXi hosts as virtual machines. So each one of these things right here is a virtual machine. And what I basically did was, by doing it that way, I was able to give it 4 CPUs and 10 gigs of RAM across the board. By doing that, it gives me the ability of running VMs on these hosts. So these, this blue and this gold looking PC-like thing, that's the icon, that is what is going to be deployed as a VM inside of these VMs. So this right here is a VM running on this VM right here, running inside of this ESXi host. So a VM running in a VM on a host. So, or nested virtualization. That's basically what ends up happening here. So that's basically how all that comes into play. Host 1, 2, and 3 have, actually, let me go ahead and adjust this real quick, because that's supposed to be host 3. I did my best to proofread, but everybody makes mistakes. So now that I have that laid out, that's basically how this is going to get all connected. And so what I did is I have a management PC, which is just a Windows 10 box that has 2 network adapters on it. And I will go back, let me go ahead and minimize this real quick. If I click on my virtual machines and I click on my host 2 admin, you can see that I have adapter 1 is VM network, right? And then I have adapter 2 is Vmware Lab Trunk. And what I did is this guy right here has an IP address of 10.255.1.151, or I'm sorry, 1.51, and I just RDP to this IP address, which is what this is right here, right? So this is the environment. So I'm RDP'd into, whoops, wrong. Go ahead and minimize that. I'm RDP'd into this box, or this guy right here, and this PC right here has another network adapter inside of VMware Lab Trunk that connects to all of my ESXi hosts that are virtual machines running in that same environment. So these hosts right here have no access to the real world, none whatsoever. Everything has to go through the management PC. Now, technically speaking, I do have the ability of allowing external access, but currently it's not set up. And when I do set it up, it'll be very, very slow. There's a virtual router, a CSR 1000V that I have deployed in a very basic deployment, and I'll show you guys how that came to be at a later point in time. So that's basically how all this stuff comes into play. I wanted to provide at least a little bit of a visual to you to help you understand how it all correlates. Now, the next one we have is going to be what we're going to be building. What's technically actually already there. And this is currently where we are at. So this is already currently built. So I have my 3 hosts. Let me go ahead and adjust this one here. That's supposed to be host 3. Let's save that real quick. And then what I did is I gave each host 4 CPUs and 10 gigs of RAM. And then I put host 1, 2, and 3 inside of my compute cluster. I put host 4 in the management cluster. And what I did is I took things like the the vCenter server and what will be NSX Manager, and they are actually going to be running inside of here. And I've already got vCenter server deployed. I loaded it to the physical host itself because then you get the best performance, right? And then because the fact that if I was to click on this guy, his network adapter, the one network adapter that he has, is physically wired into the VMware Lab Trunk. And he has an IP address of 10.0.0.20. So his IP address is on the same subnet as a lot of the other devices that are in the topology. And we'll see exactly how that works at a later point in time. And then what I did from there is I've already uploaded NSX Manager to the host. Literally all I did was just copy the files. I haven't done anything else besides that. And in an upcoming video, I will actually walk you through the deployment of, how to set it up and all that good stuff that goes along with it. The setup is actually pretty easy. If you were to Google it, you could see screenshots of the actual steps. I'm not too terribly concerned about showing you how to deploy it. I'm more concerned about showing you how to work with it because there's a lot of things that come into play with it. The environment that we currently have is going to be one of those that we need to add more and more capabilities as we're going along. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to get everything working the way we need to, but as we progress through all the content that we're going to be talking about, it'll start to make sense more and more as we get there. Now, one of the things that I definitely want you to understand is that when we're talking about how this comes into play, the vCenter server and the NSX Manager are devices that normally would be deployed in the management cluster. That's normally where they would get deployed, is right here. But I chose not to load them in a nested environment for the simple fact of better performance and resource utilization. So when you look here, this icon right here is the NSX controller cluster. Technically speaking, it's supposed to be 3 nodes so that we always have redundancy, but because this is a lab, I'm only going to deploy 1. Then we have our Edge Services Gateway, which is going to connect the physical to the virtual world. I'm going to deploy a couple of those as we proceed through, but we'll get to that when we get there. Then we have the Distributed Logical Router Control VM, which is going to be an enhancement of the original DLR. And what these guys here is the DLR. So you can deploy a DLR without a control VM in NSX for vSphere, but you lose some flexibility and capability when you do that and not deploy the control VM. But irregardless of how we do that, I'll show you how to deploy without the control VM and work with it, and then I'll deploy with the control VM, and you get a little bit better resource utilization and things like that. But it's more control more than anything else. It's not so much that I have I'm not a fan of the regular DLR. I just want more control. So we'll deploy that and see exactly how it all ties together. And so what we did is I've got one virtual distributed switch, or one VDS, and for connecting everything together and making it look kind of symmetrical and easy to follow, this guy right here and this guy right here are actually the same VDS. It's one VDS that I've deployed, and I've added all 4 hosts to the VDS. There's 4 physical NICs on each one of these hosts, and each NIC has been mapped to the VDS. There is a CSR1000V that is deployed, and I will be logging into, and once we get into connecting our Edge Services Gateway to the CSR1000V, the CSR1000V will have a connection to the physical network, which is what I call this right here, my network backbone, which is going to connect to the rest of my home lab. So I'll be able to provide internet access to all these VMs sitting here and go through all of that. I'm also going to be deploying a Wireshark VM inside of this host, which is currently not there yet, but the Wireshark VM will allow us to see the details of what's happening in the backbone. So we'll be able to see all the back and forth communication. We'll be able to demystify the VXLAN encapsulation process and things like that. And then lastly, before I get any more distracted, this is going to be where we scale our topology, where we're going to go through and do things like site-to-site VPN, and we're going to do layer 2 VPN, and then eventually what will be universal distributed logical switches and logical routers in a stretched deployment. So that'll pretty much wrap up the heavier lifting components of the deployment. So there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to have to go through and do in terms of how this all comes together. But one of the things that I did want to make sure that everybody was aware of, if I go back over here to my RDP session and I go I minimize my host. As you can see over here, I was playing around with some capabilities and things like that. Let me go ahead and pull back open Google Chrome real quick. As you can see, all 4 hosts are deployed, 3 of which are in a compute cluster. And if we look at my networking, we can see that the VDS, if we look at the hosts, I have 3 hosts in the VDS, but if I go to hosts, all 4 are, host 4 has to get added to it, but I can take care of that. It's actually pretty easy. And we're going to have to do that. So let me go ahead and just knock that out real quick. I didn't realize he wasn't on the VDS. So I'm going to go actions, manage hosts, add host. We're going to go ahead and grab host 4. I just added him a few minutes ago before I started recording this video. Go ahead and move all the adapters over to where they have to go. That's one of the things about NSX is all of the devices, all the hosts need to be on the VDS in order for this to work. I'll go ahead and move the VM kernel adapter over to the VDS management. There are no VMs currently, and we should just be able to push that over, and then we'll be able to join the host now, and you should see host 4 should populate there. Perfect. So now host 4 is now there as well. Beyond that, that's pretty much all we have to really worry about in terms of day-to-day operations and things like that. When we get a little bit further along, we're going to go through and one of the first things we're going to do in a deeper dive video will be actually deploying and getting NSX Manager online. And then we're going to integrate this vCenter deployment with our NSX Manager. And we're going to get the NSX plugin going here in this environment. And then once we have that deployed, we'll then be able to go ahead and start doing all the things that we need to for that. So like deploying logical switches and deploying DLRs and stuff like that. The last little bit of information that I'm going to cover real quick is on the vSAN data store. I'm going to go, if you click on data stores and then you find vSAN and go to files, I'm going to click on this .vsan.stats, and this is where you would actually be able to start uploading files to it. So I'm going to go ahead and upload an operating system. And it says vSAN data store can only upload VMDK files using the let's give that a shot. So let me go ahead and pause real quick and go find the file I'm looking for. Alright, so I knew this was going to happen, which you get operation failed. If you click on details, it tells you that for whatever reason it couldn't upload because of the certificate, and it tried to leverage host 2 to do that. So if you literally just click on here, it'll automatically bring you to host 2, and what it really needs is it needs you to accept the certificate as a self-signed certificate. There we go. So now if we go back over here, that's all we had to do. Click on OK, and then we'll go ahead and upload files. And yep, we're going to say, we will click on here again, click on open. And now it's starting to upload the file to this data store, which is what we wanted to do. So we should be able to upload a file to vSAN, and then we'll be able to create our VMs that we're going to deploy. So I'm actually going to deploy a few virtual machines inside of the compute cluster. The management cluster will only be used for the NSX controller node, our DLR control VMs, our ESG controller VMs. We're going to deploy a couple of them so that we can see exactly how that plays out. But that's going to be basically what we're going to accomplish with that. And then once we have those details in play, we'll see that everything's going to work out as we move forward. But that, in a nutshell, is basically what we need to do in order for all of this to work the way we need it to. And then once this is good to go, we'll have a couple of VMs deployed, and then as we start to add devices and things like that, and add services and deploy NSX and get the deploy logical switches and things like that, you'll start to see how the environment will grow and go from there. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and that's the end of this video. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and I'll walk you through how to deploy some VMs on vSAN and that stuff, and then we'll deploy NSX Manager, get it out online, get it integrated with vCenter Server, license it, and then go from there. Until next time, guys, thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll catch all of you in the next video.